I would like to take a few moments here, though, and introduce our featured speaker today, Paul Larsen. So from flipping hamburgers on Main Street to leading HR for Wall Street, Paul has continually reinvented his leadership voice throughout his life to thrive within the uncertainty of our ever-chaotic world. So as an imposter syndrome survivor and now a Wharton Business School executive coach, Paul has successfully partnered with hundreds of leaders and teams to help them build a management brand of compassion and collaboration and lead from a mindset of strength and confidence. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Paul. Paul, take it away.
Andy, who is that you just read about? Who is that person that you just read about? I mean, every time I hear like that, which of course I know because I wrote it, hello, it triggers even some sense of an imposter syndrome. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So Andy, thank you so much for this opportunity to be part of the DreamBank. And I just want to say welcome to everybody who is coming today, and to those of us that will join us later on when they view the recording. What I'd like to do is just start off. We're in the midst of summer here, at least in our hemisphere, right? Where is everybody coming in from today? What's your location and what's the weather? So let me hear it in the chat. Where are you, and what's the weather like where you are? I'd just like to see where everyone is. I'm in San Francisco, and we've got that famous marine layer that is in today. Downtown Madison, 73. St. Louis, storms off and on. Just north of Madison, wonderful. Philly, hot and humid. Corinne, I was in Philly not too long ago and love that town. Atlanta, wonderful. Madison, wow, here we go. New Hampshire, overcast. Spring Green, Wisconsin. I love that. That Spring Green sounds wonderful. Downtown Milwaukee, perfect 70 degree. Thank you, Whitney. Just south of Madison. Kalamazoo, very gray and cloudy. Oh, we've got some consistency then across the U.S. I know the storms have come in and out. I've been watching the travel and so forth. These poor folks that have been kind of all over the place, right? Stanford, Virginia, 88 and warm. So Madtown, Wisconsin, beautiful. That's wonderful. So thank you so much for joining us today. Now I'd like to ask you another question as we get going and talk a little bit about it. And let me just kind of share my screen and we will get into everything here. By the way, you'll get copies of my slides if you'd like them later. So that is something that I will make available to you amongst a few other little goodies. So we're going to talk today about embracing, hold on just a second. I got to get this. There we go. Let me go up there. There we go. Embracing your imposter voice and making it work for you. And what does that mean? So there's my next question. Thank you. Here's my next question that I'm looking forward to. Who has ever felt like a fake or fraud in your life? Let me just say anybody in the chat. Is anyone? Yeah, Corinne, thank you so much. Yes. Who else has ever felt like just, sometimes you might feel like a fake or fraud or that you don't belong. Thanks, Joe. You bet. What I love around this, here we go. Here, yep. We all have many times we feel like a fake or fraud, or that we don't belong, or what am I doing here? I don't feel good enough, right? Around that. So let me, let's go forward with a little bit here. Hold on just a moment. There's somewhere they say that multitasking is not the sign of an advanced brain. Now, if that hasn't been said, I'm going to say it right now and make it true for me, that multitasking. So sometimes when I go on to my wonderful presentations here with all of you, I kind of have to be focused on certain things as we go forward. So if I seem a little lost sometimes, it's just because I'm trying to sort of look and figure out where I am. But that's kind of true in all my life. So who's ever felt like a fake or fraud, I join you in all of this, where we don't feel like we belong. And there I am. That's my high school picture. And believe me, if there's not an imposter picture like that, I'm not sure what is. Not sure what was going on with my wings, which I would call my hair at that time. But that was the style back in the 70s, which when I graduated from high school, which was right at the tip of the 70s and 80s. So I love this. As a coach, I work with not just myself, but I work with, I'm blessed to work with people all over the world, actually. And the one thing I've learned about us is we love to wear our name tags, right? Whatever that name tag is in life. So hello, I'm stressed. Hello, I'm angry. Hello, I'm proud. Hello, I'm excited. Hello, I'm inspired. Hey, hello, I'm jealous. I'm envious. Hello, I'm angry. All of that means is that we're human. And that's what imposter syndrome is. It's a human condition. It's a human condition created by us. And it's certainly a human condition that we can take steps to sort of dilute as well. A lot of you might feel like this. I certainly do. When we're kind of going uphill, it's like who I am and then who I should be. And we carry sometimes the burdens of whatever that is in terms of the should or the could or the need tos, or all those things that happen in our lives that we're comparing ourselves to. So sometimes we're just kind of pushing this up further and further up the hill. So imposter syndrome is just like this. It's like, do you kind of feel like sometimes you're trying to fit in, that okay, if I just kind of shrink down a little bit here, I kind of do the same posture, that I'm going to be okay. They're not going to notice that I don't belong. They're not going to notice that maybe I'm not good enough. They're not going to notice that I'm really kind of pulling one over on people. You notice the wording I'm using. We're going to get into that in just a little bit more specifics in just a moment, because that really details imposter syndrome. Sometimes the place you're used to is not the place you belong. And I love that, because it's sort of like thinking about, we get used to our comfort zone. We get used to things that we create for ourselves, which are very comfortable. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes in life, we're always pushed. You got to push out of your comfort zone. You got to step out of that comfort zone. And that's true for certain growth and to take those steps in development, but only if it's purposeful, only if it's something you desire, only if you have that successful vision of what you want to become. But to realize that sometimes where we are is not the place that we actually belong, especially if we're striving for something different. Now, I love this piece. There are people less qualified than you doing the things you want to do simply because they decided to believe in themselves. So I come from the HR world. I've had many successes and failures in the corporate world, and they're all learnings to me. I don't even always like to label successes and failures. It's kind of like positive feedback, negative feedback. It's feedback, right? And we choose to do with it what we want. But I've learned in HR, when I worked with a lot of different folks within teams and within leadership and so forth, a lot of times people would get promoted and they'd come to my office. Well, how come he got promoted or she got promoted? And it doesn't always have to do with just straight capabilities. Straight capabilities is what we would call kind of the science of our mind. It's what they did with those straight capabilities, and they created kind of an artistic landscape, kind of a work of art, kind of like what's behind me here in my house, that brought together the art and science. But part of that art is believing in yourself, even if you're not surrounded by people who may be believing in you in that moment. So keep that in mind as we kind of go through our time together. So what is imposter? What does it feel like, or what do our imposter voices kind of say to ourselves? Well, one of the first and foremost is, I don't belong here. Whatever that is, could be a situation. A lot of times it shows up in our career environments, in our business environments. Those of you that are striving as part of the whole DreamBank community to kind of go for your dreams. Like, this is it. I'm going for it. Like, but do I really belong here? Gosh, they're so far ahead. They're doing many things differently. They're so much smarter than me, which is so that's always been the hashtag mantra for myself. So I don't belong here. This happens a lot too in academia, where students find themselves in different situations, whether they go from one grade to another or one academic journey to another, and then they find themselves surrounded by colleagues or peers or obviously other students, and they're like, I don't really belong here, after they've achieved a certain amount of success. So that's one of the voices. Another one is, I'm not as good as everyone thinks I am. It's not just, I'm not as good. It's, I'm not as good as everyone thinks I am. So people have an elevated sense of my capabilities. This is another voice I can tick in. Like, okay, I just got that promotion, or I just had some incredible success, or I just launched this product, or I started this startup, or I'm now in business for myself, whatever it may be. And everyone, you know, I'm getting some accolades and I'm getting some great feedback, and I'm getting that, but gosh, I'm not really as good as everyone thinks I am. Again, this can trigger in so many areas. It can trigger in relationships, can trigger, again, academia, it can trigger in our career. So this is another part of the imposter voice of not, it's not just like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good as everyone thinks I am. I'm really faking it and will be found out as a fraud. And these are kind of words that are actually very specific. Faking it and found out and fraud, kind of the F3s, fake, fraud, found out, because imposter syndrome is part of it is being found out. You're going to be unmasked of who you are. So it's not just about like, oh, I'm just kind of getting through, I'm faking it till I make it, or, you know, confidence or whatever it might be. No, it's really thinking that I'm just kind of getting along here. I'm kind of really faking it, but I'm going to be found out as a fraud at some point. Da-da-da. So let's go over some of the imposter myths that I just kind of alluded to. You just need to have more confidence. It's not about just having more confidence. I can be a very confident imposter. I have stood up on stage in my corporate career. I stood up on stage at all hands meetings, or what we would call town halls. I could stand in board meetings. Part of my career was at JP Morgan. I'd go to board meetings back in New York as part of the human capital group. I could secure my space, but it doesn't mean I didn't have the confidence. It was more than that. It was like, gosh, am I going to be found out as a fake or fraud? So you can be a quote unquote, it sounds kind of contradictory, but you can be a confident imposter. It's a performance issue. Now, this is coming from human resources. You're getting a human resource guru here. Believe me, the people that have performance issues usually don't have imposter syndrome. They actually think they can do a lot better than they actually are. Hence the performance issue or the performance gap. It'll go away over time. You know, it doesn't usually go away unless we do something deliberate and purposeful about it. Or it's time to give up, or it's time to just avoid it, or it's time to run away from it. So this is where the imposter syndrome can keep us stuck, because we can go to that last quadrant there and like, yeah, it's just time to give up. I'm not going to raise my hand. I don't want to go for that promotion. I'm not even going to ask that question because I don't want to look stupid. It could be any number of different things. Some of them can be very life-altering, i.e. going for a promotion, going into a new type of relationship, perhaps. And some might be more minute, about raising our hand or asking a question or trying to appear not as stupid. But those are all going to add up to potentially a life-altering journey. So what are some truths about imposter syndrome? Well, it actually was formally recognized in 1978. So it's been around for decades. It's not actually a syndrome per se. It's kind of attached that name to it. It's more like an imposter phenomenon in terms of the terminology they use in the science and medical communities. It occurs. Now, this is key. This is key. It occurs in all genders, ages, and life scenarios. So back in the mid to late 80s and into the 90s as well, imposter syndrome was talked about. It wasn't talked about anywhere near as it is today. The awareness that we have around it today has unmasked it, actually. And it was talked about as a point of like, oh, it's kind of a woman thing or a female thing. It occurs more in that particular gender. So it was gender specific. Well, when they kind of unmasked some of that data and some those stats, they found that no, it's across the board. It's fairly equitable in males and females at, anywhere from 49 to 51%. It's just that women admitted it more. So women were more vulnerable to admitting it back then. So it appeared that it was more gender specific. As a coach now, as somebody who coaches folks, again, as I mentioned, in all different industries, all different types of positions, some in the corporate world, entrepreneurs, some folks just wanting to kind of change their life a little bit. I see it across the board. I see it across the board in male and female, and in all, as I mentioned, in all different life scenarios and all different age groups as well now, which is actually kind of a good thing, because then it's being recognized earlier on, and it's like, okay, what do we do with it? What do I do with these thoughts, which we'll get to in just a moment. It's certainly not a performance issue. In fact, up to 90% of successful professionals, keyword successful, have admitted to having it at one time or another in their lives. So that's the key point here. It's not a performance issue or gap. It's people who are successful that have admitted it to having it at one point or another in their lives. People like myself kind of like just live with it. And we'll get to in just a moment in terms of how I work with it and how I integrate it, and I actually use it in terms of a benefit. But if you've ever felt like a fake or fraud, you've ever felt like you don't belong, that some of this is like ringing true for you, give yourself a huge, hearty congratulations, because you're in incredible company. Imposter syndrome is one of those things that's like with incredible company. These are the folks around the world in the public domain that have admitted to having it. And this is just like 0.01% of the people in the public domain that have admitted it to having it. Howard Schultz, who is the former CEO twice of Starbucks, is one of the corporate gurus who has talked a lot about imposter syndrome. The person that I love to highlight is the late artist, Maya Angelou, who is an incredibly prolific author. But she said over and over again, and one of her comments there is, I've written 11 books, but each time I think, they're going to find out now. I run a game on everybody, and they're going to find me out. She talked about imposter syndrome a lot, and yet completely had accolades, recognized the whole bit. So these are people that had admitted to it. And up in the left-hand corner is myself, not part of the public domain in terms of the celebrity or paparazzi, but the normal person, the person who just goes about his or her life, eking out and looking and specifically, attempting to attain my dreams, but living with imposter syndrome in my life. So all of us can join into these folks that have admitted to having it at one point or another. So let's talk a little bit about what goes on in our brain when this is happening. I love this from Liz and Molly, and you'll see some of their vignettes throughout my presentation. In fact, you already have. The leading cause of stress for us is my brain. We have all of these different voices in our brains. In fact, that's what kind of can make us very successful. It depends what we do with these voices. They might be called the inner critics. They might be called gremlins. I work with a body of work called positive intelligence, and we use the term saboteurs as part of these voices. At any one of these voices, it could be a controller, it could be the judge, any one of them can kind of team up and become kind of our imposter voice, right? So it's a matter of really understanding and being aware, this is just who we are. This is just what we have in our head, in our brain. We have sort of all of these voices that are competing for our ears to hear, to understand, and to act on. And it's up to us what we do with that. National Science Foundation taking on this stress piece. The National Science Foundation back in 2005, which I know nowadays is, 2023, just seems like an incredibly long time ago, but I like to think, it's just recent. The average person has about anywhere from 12,000 to 60,000 specific thoughts per day. Of those, 80% are negative and 95% are exactly the same repetitive thoughts as the day before. We are nothing but a big legacy system. For those of you that are in the technology world, we're just these big legacy systems that sometimes we need to retire, right? And if any of you have ever gone through that in the corporate world where you're trying to retire a legacy system, we know the amount of moving parts that takes and how successful or not that can be. Here's the key though. It doesn't matter to me when I read 12,000 to 60,000, that to me is a huge variance. To me, 500 is a lot for that matter. But I do believe so many of our thoughts can have that what if kind of scenario, that negative piece that we bring into our thinking. Some of that is part of our survival instinct that we know, right? That whole flight or fight piece that we are embedded with. 95% though, again, come from like the day before. But here's what I want to bring into our thought process. We spend so much time maybe picking out the type of food we want to eat, right? You know, I want to go for this type of food today, or no, let's go here for lunch, or for dinner, I want this. We spend time on the clothes that we wear. You know, even in our virtual world, we can spend time on, you know, like I want to look nice. I want this type of shirt, or this bow tie, or I want this kind of pair of shoes, or whatever it might be. We'll focus on the type of cars we drive. That can be very, very important to us. Or where we spend our time, our hobbies, or the vacations that we take. But we don't spend anywhere near that type of deliberate, purposeful focus on the thoughts that we think. So we have the capabilities to focus on anything and to bring anything into our lives with a purpose and that deliberate sort of action. And what I ask is that, hey, let's start thinking about a thought diary right up here of the thoughts that we are thinking. It doesn't mean we have to write everything down. I don't know if you're like me, but I've gone through my life where I've had different dietitians or nutritionists, or I've decided I'm going to get fit. And so I got a personal trainer or a wonderful person who's an expert in those areas. What's the first thing they have us do when we are looking to maybe shed a few pounds or at least get conditioned, right? In terms of our food and in terms of what we intake, they have us write everything down. They have us write down what we eat so we can cry over what we're eating for breakfast and lunch and dinner. And we can see the caloric intake and the sugar intake and all these things. And then we can just like throw all that away and go back and eating my Butterfingers for dinner. But in other words, that's what they do. And they have us do that for a reason. So we can be very deliberate and purposeful with what we are intaking into our bodies. We don't do that with our thoughts. And of course, when I see 12 to 60,000 thoughts, I'm like, well, hello, I don't even want to try to do that. But what I invite you to think about doing is when you have a triggering effect, a triggering event, and I'll get to that in a moment, but that's just nothing more than when your imposter voice, when one of your gremlins, when one of your inner critics, when something is speaking all of a sudden to you up here, what is happening in that time frame? What is happening in that moment? What is happening in that environment? Are you alone? Are you watching something? Are you scrolling on the endless streams of social media? Are you in a group of people? Are you with a particular individual? To really pay attention to what that event is. It doesn't mean it's a bad event. It doesn't mean there's negativity associated with it per se. The first piece is awareness of that. And then I'll get to the second step in just a moment. But that's my first ask of you, is when these thoughts kind of come into you that are triggering around the imposter thoughts, when do you feel like a fake or fraud? When do you feel like you don't belong? When do you feel like you're going to be unmasked or you're not good enough? To really pay attention to those in the environment, the situation, and make note of that.
Hey, Paul, we've had a couple questions that have come through. I wanted to address
absolutely
before we moved on. So this one comes from Joe. So not to change our direction at all, but I'm curious if there's any correlation between imposter syndrome and ADHD diagnosis or other neurodivergent traits. And a couple other folks have kind of seconded that or like Joe's question. So I don't know if you can speak to that, or maybe if there's some resources you might be able to direct that talk a little bit more about imposter syndrome and ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share that that, first of all, brilliant question. There's been some studies done around that, and it's certainly of late, because all of that has come into our, come into our awareness over the last couple of decades, right? And the impact of that on those of us as adults, and certainly as children and students. And there has been some studies done on that. Now, the studies, I don't think there's a direct correlation from what I have found. So thank you, Joe, for asking that. But I don't think, and again, I'm not a scientist here, and I don't even play one at work, by the way. But I don't think it's too big of a stretch to say, yes, there has to be kind of a correlation through all of this. But I would be happy to send you a slide later on. In fact, I'll include it with my slide deck here that has all of the resources that I have used along with all of the studies. And I'm almost certain embedded in some of that will be some of what you're asking. But I don't want to say anything here that would put me as any type of expert on that, but a brilliant question. So thank you, Joe. Regarding sort of and this ties into sort of the superficiality of our minds right now, without getting into the direct diagnosis, right? But the superficiality, when we think about Carol Dweck's work, she wrote the book Mindset. And she talks about the fixed and growth mindset. And I believe that we can have all different other types of mindsets as well. It's not just fixed and growth, but these are the two that can be very predominant in our life. Where the fixed mindset, I'm stuck here forever. This is where our imposter syndrome lives and wants to keep us in that fixed mindset where things cannot change, where, that's not going to work that way. We've never done it that way here. Versus the growth mindset, which can be a little messy, which can be a little awkward, which can be a little uncomfortable, but where we can think about, wait a minute, I can build my way out of this somehow. And that's where I want us to focus around all this. You've probably seen something very similar to this, where the fixed mindset is, my intelligence is static. It's not going to change. I give up, easily. I'm going to avoid that. My potential is predetermined. Things aren't going to change. I stick to what I know. Versus the growth, where it's like, okay, I'm going to try something new. It doesn't have to be something 180. It doesn't have to be, a large scale transformative change. Now, there's a corporate speak for you. Large scale transformative change. We used to do that all the time in the corporate world. And those of you that might be still in the corporate world, God love you. Large scale transformative change, and it never stuck because we never took the baby steps around that. We did these huge changes. And we're like, well, how come it's not working? Because we weren't taking it baby step by baby step by baby step. I like to try something new. We have to kind of get used to it. The reason they're called baby steps is for a reason. What do babies do? Babies kind of get up and they wobble and they fall. They get up and they wobble and they fall. But they have the curiosity and they have the courage to keep trying. And then they're going to ask for support. And then they're going to hold on to something. And then eventually they're going to take these steps, and their steps are going to be a little bit more consistent. That's kind of how we grow still. That's kind of how we develop. We may not have to take as long as what a baby takes to walk, but we still go through that same algorithm around that. But that's why when we try these large scale changes, a lot of times they don't stick, is because we haven't put the ladder in place to help us in terms of that growth. I learned from feedback. Easier said than done. I don't know any of you, and I applaud any of you that just seek feedback on a consistent basis. We're not always wired for that. We're not always wired to just, oh, please give me feedback. I take any feedback. I love feedback. Having been in the corporate world as an individual contributor and team member and manager and exec and HR, and I've gotten fired, I got laid off, I've had great promotions, I've had it all. Feedback is, it's not necessarily just something we're wired to. So again, it's about asking in small doses. And what do we do in the corporate world? We ask for feedback, like all of a sudden we're vomiting up feedback for everybody, and everyone gets these long reports, and sometimes we're stunned and shocked at the feedback. Even if it's feedback that can be actually really easily recognized and or positive, we can just be stunned with that amount of information overload, because again, we can only process so much. So feedback, like anything, has to be kind of in smaller doses. Do I believe feedback can work for us? Absolutely. But feedback has to begin with ourselves as well. So I'm a big believer, and I'll get to this in just a moment, of giving ourselves our own feedback, right? Before we go out and ask for other feedback from people in terms of how we're doing, quote unquote. I'm inspired by others people's success. Again, wonderful. I love that in terms of the growth piece. And to understand that I probably the last 5 years, 2019 is when I did a shift for myself. I've had incredible, I have a blessed life. I love my life. I have a calling of what I do as a coach. It's what I am supposed to do. This is it, folks. As an introvert, I found like who I'm supposed to be, and I coach people, and I love it. And it was my calling. But I still have that, well, how come they're more successful than I am? I can't believe they got that. Look at what they're doing. That comparative, that's the judge. That's this piece up here. To then understand and to shift to say, wait a minute, the world is huge. The world is ever changing. The world evolves, right? As we evolve. There's big enough slices for everybody here. And to shift and say, wait a minute, I applaud that success. I am inspired by that success because it means that's what I want. Maybe not that same way, perhaps, maybe the same way. That is something I had to work on, that I did. I worked on it with my coach, right? And I love working with people on that themselves. So it's easy to say these things and in here. It's another thing to put these things into practice, because our ego can be very, very strong. Our ego is kind of the science of our mind. And it's when we are kind of standing on top of everything else versus, I love this kind of diagram here, the eco, when we're in the environment and we're kind of one with the environment. It doesn't mean we're still not leading. It doesn't mean we're not being successful, but we're just more collaborative versus standing on top of everyone else and really not hearing anything below us. Another way to look at this is kind of do we lead our lives for the ego or through kind of the soul, right? Are we reactive? Are we judgmental, stressed out, inflexible? You know, the martyr, the tyrant. We listen to the I shoulds all the time. This is where the imposter syndrome lives, is on the ego side of everything. Versus kind of like, okay, how can I be a little bit more curious here? How can I be a little bit more courageous? How can I be a little bit more connected? Can I be a little bit more forgiving? First with myself and potentially with others. I like to think that everyone is doing the best that they can with what they have. And yes, I may not agree with everybody, but I accept the fact that everyone's kind of doing the best that they can with what they have. Are we whole? You know, are we excited? Are we peaceful? It's another way of looking at the ego and eco. Another way to think about this is art and science, just art and science. You know, the science of things is what I like to think of as the manager. It's the to-do list. It's the policies. It's the operation. It's how you do everything. It's following that checklist. You've got to do that to be successful. Companies need to have that from an operational standpoint, right? We need to have it from a human standpoint. And then the art is putting that all together and bringing in the relationships, bringing in the influence, bringing in the leadership. So managers are going to focus a lot on the IQ. They're going to focus a lot on who's in the org chart, how many people report to me, how many subordinates do I have? I still hear that word all the time, by the way. How big is my organization? Because size matters to a manager. You have to follow me because you report to me on the org chart. So you have to do what I say. I tell you, managers tell. Leaders can do all of those things as managers, but leaders create a vision. They enroll people. People want to follow leaders, not because they're part of an org chart, not because they're even part of that organization. They just want to follow that person. They want to be enrolled by that person because that person represents something. They're creating an artful way of living that combines with the science. We integrate both of these that people want to be part of. And we all know that. We all probably have people in our lives like that, within our community, within our family and friends, mentors that we have, people that we work with, people in schools. I mean, all sorts. So we can understand that they are leaders. Leaders can usually manage. They got the management down, and then they bring in the leadership. But not all managers can lead. So that's the key, is understanding, do you have that manager mindset, which can be successful, and you can get, quote unquote, recognized for that as promoted, like in the corporate world, but you're not going to go any further than that. And the imposter syndrome lives in that and keeps us kind of contained in that with those voices. Whereas the leadership just kind of blossoms out of that. Einstein was a great example of that, because Einstein had imposter syndrome. He actually was one of the people that talked about it, but he was able to kind of blend that art and science together. So this is how we create our life, right? My name, our thoughts that we create up here, create our feelings, create our behaviors or actions, and then go back to our thoughts. It's very cyclical. And there's not an action that we take or a feeling that we have that doesn't start with a thought. So it might be a fleeting thought because it's so fast, but any feeling that we have or any behavior or action that we take starts with a thought up here. So this is how we kind of create our lives. And this is also kind of how we can intervene and create our own intervention around that. So I like to think of our mind like this, a beautiful room, and this is obviously very subjective. This may not be a beautiful room to all of you, right? But pristine and kind of clean and clear lines and, different things, and things are kind of in its place, but there are some things that are kind of a little out of place. And there's just a wonderful kind of semblance to this particular picture. So this is like, okay, is your mind like this? Or do we allow our limiting beliefs to come in, which are all the things I've talked about so far about imposter syndrome, those voices we have, and then our mind looks like this. It's cluttered, right? It's clustered. We can't even find things. And if you notice, sort of the things that are top of mind are going to be the things that are going to be on top of all the boxes, or on top of those piles, or on top of the couch, whatever it might be. So we can spend time rebooting, our computers all the time. But how many times do we kind of reboot our mind and refresh our mind through any of these actions? Because we never really know how toxic a situation is until you breathe fresher air. Because when we live like this, we're in it. We are constantly in this, and it begins to surround us, right? And then we don't actually really know that it's as toxic as it is until we have a chance to kind of like pop out of that for a second. I lived my life up to about 2004, having some good success in careers and so forth. And then in 2004, I got an incredible promotion that I took as luck or fate, because I was in the right place at the right time. And hold on to that thought for a moment. And I was heading up HR. I was heading up HR for a $3 billion organization. No clue what I was doing, in the sense, what I kept telling myself. They're going to find out I don't know what I'm doing. They're going to find out I'm a fake. They're going to find out I'm a fraud. This was playing in my head. They're going to ask me to leave. They're going to come and ask me to leave. My mentor at the time, to this day, she's a heart of hearts, Laura. She played such a pivotal role. She started noticing how in certain meetings I was very quiet. I kind of shied away from things. I shied away from stating my own opinions. I didn't stand sort of in myself. I didn't stand in my beliefs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she says, what's going on with you? She goes, I'm noticing, that you actually are going a different way than kind of what got you to where you are today, right? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't want to take up too much time. People are really busy. I don't know if everyone, usually what I'm thinking of, somebody else will say. And then she looked right at me. And this is one of those moments that cleared my room. She looked right at me and she said, do you feel like a fake or fraud? Which, of course, I had been thinking of. Nobody had ever said those words to me before, right? And I was like, what are you? Whoa. And it was like, it was like the music played, the light shined. It was like, I looked at her and I just said, She goes, oh, she got imposter syndrome. That's all. Like, oh, you've got a cold, or, oh, don't worry about it. And I said, say what? Like, I had not heard of it before. And even though I had been kind of dealing with these feelings, when I leaned into it more, and that's when I really found out about it. And it was like, wow, this is it. This is exactly what I have. And what am I going to do about it now? And when this was back in 2004, so it was a precursor to a lot of the tech that we have today. But when I did some research on things, it was like, well, gosh, there wasn't a lot on it in terms of how to overcome it or what to do with it. But I knew right there that I had been in a toxic situation that I was creating, right? Until I put on my own oxygen mask to breathe some fresh air. So this is what happened in that moment. This goes back to one of the other voices we have with imposter syndrome, because I thought the reason for my success is all due to outside factors, not my internal validation, such as luck or fate. And this comes into play because I had some mask makers that were helping me enable that voice. I would have people that would say, oh my gosh, Paul, congratulations on that promotion. You are now head of HR. How lucky you are. You were in the right place at the right time. And I would sit there and say, yeah, I was. Yeah, this is really luck. People would say that, and I would agree with it, which only made my mask stronger. Now, they might have not had any kind of malicious intent. In fact, I don't think they do. It goes back to kind of how I believe that people are doing the best they can. So they just thought, well, how did he get that job? They were dealing with their own judgments, or dealing with their own control, or dealing with all their own comparative envy or jealousy, whatever it might be. Or they might have just wished me well. But they used terms that were like, wait a minute, I didn't get this because of luck. I didn't get this because of fate. I got it because of who I am and where I stand and what I do and my capabilities and my own validation and my own recognition. And what I recognize, I love this from Ilana Van Zandt, who says, you have to meet people where they are, and sometimes you have to leave them there. So it's not about getting rid of people completely, and you meet them where they are, but it's like, I sometimes you have to surround yourself with some new folks, maybe a new tribe. It doesn't mean you replace everybody completely, because sometimes we can't. We're in relationships, we have family and friends that we may not always have that choice to do that. In the work environment, we work with who we work with. We can't always leave. I believe we always have choices, right? But sometimes those choices are going to be more deliberate than not, or more in front of us than not. But we can limit our proximity to people, and we can limit the impact those individuals can have on us. I love this one from Real Talk Kim. You can't keep getting mad at people for sucking the life out of you if you keep giving them the straw. So if people are creating that emotional void for you, or they keep creating that imposter syndrome triggers for you. And again, how do you know this? It's because of your awareness around things. It's because of when you notice what you're triggered when that imposter voice comes up, right? Is it a particular individual? Is it a particular situation? But if you keep giving people the straw to do that, and you're not taking that back, then you are allowing people to do that, whether they are actually doing it purposely or not. But you are enabling it, you are allowing it, because we always have choices around that. So what does this mean? as we kind of finish up today and we start to kind of wrap up a little bit, I work with a lot what I'd like to be able to call reframes. And I'm sure all of you are somewhat familiar with reframes in life. How do we reframe, what we've got going on up here? So I talked about overcoming imposter syndrome. And I use that term because it's really highlighted in SEO, right? Everyone Googles overcome imposter syndrome. But I like to have a lot of flow in my life, not a lot of friction. And when I think of overcoming something, I'm like, dude, I'm tired. Like it makes me fatigued just to think about overcoming something. We've always got to like go for the goal, go get our SMART goals, got to do this. Life can be, we can choose to fight life, or we can choose to try to figure out flow with life. So it's friction or flow. And for me, just for me, overcoming imposter syndrome has a lot of friction associated with it. And I thought about that early on because I was thinking to myself, okay, how do I overcome it? How do I get rid of it completely? And what I realized is I was getting triggered by my imposter voice in many different kinds of scenarios. And sometimes I'd go for a fairly elongated calendar timeline where I wouldn't. And then it would pop up again over some kind of situation that would just like, the little voice appears like, there he is. He's now rested in this. Let's get him right now. And the imposter voice would come up. I had this happen not too long ago. I spoke at a conference back in 2019, right before the world changed and for a couple of years. And I got off stage, and I have a book that I wrote called Find Your Voice as a Leader. And by the way, I'll talk about the book in just a moment, but it's Find Your Voice as a Leader. And I had copies of this book on a table, right? Where after a conference, people come up. This gentleman came up and he goes, Paul, he goes, I loved what you had to say. He goes, and your energy and you were very inspiring. He goes, is this your book right here? And I was like, yeah, this is my book. I had copies of it that I brought with me. And he says, I want to buy all your books. I want to buy every single copy. I want to bring it back to my company and give it out to my team members. In that moment, the book's been out for a few years. I wrote the book from my heart about finding your voice because I thought we have all these voices up here. I'm going to find one that's going to lead me out of all this. So the book's been out for a few years. In that moment, the imposter just came in. He goes, you have to tell him you're not an author, that you are a fake author, that you are a fraud as an author. It was just like that. I had been selling the book for a few years. The book has gotten some lovely reviews. I love the book, the fact that I was able to write the book. It was an accomplishment. I recognized myself for it. Yet right in that moment, when he wanted to buy all the copies, that voice came right up and just said, bam, don't let him do that. You can't let him spend your money. Let him spend his money on all of your books. There it was right there. And in that moment, I did exactly what we're talking about here about reframes. My reaction would have said, I can't let you do this. I'll let you buy one or two and I have to save some for others. But my response, which took 5 seconds, and this is a difference between reaction and response. My response was a reframe of my imposter voice. And I thought to myself, this is new for me. Somebody wants to buy out my whole supply of books. This is brilliant. So I reframed the imposter voice, which was you're a fake or fraud, into no, this is the first time this has happened. And I'm going to like lean into this and say, absolutely. All of that took place in like a nanosecond as I'm looking at him. All of this was going on up here. And I said, thank you so very much for that. And I absolutely will allow you to do that. And then on top of that, I'll send you a couple of coaching sessions that we can have and so forth and so on. But this just shows you right there in that moment, when something pops up, we can choose to do with it as we please, right? And I chose a reframe, which is a response and not a reaction. My reaction would have been, oh yeah, absolutely. My reaction would have been an imposter reaction. But my response, which took a few seconds, was like, okay, here we go. So I can choose to. I want to feel better. One step at a time. The reframes that we have. Louise Hay says that everything we say to ourselves, positive or negative, is an affirmation. We might think of affirmations as being kind of positive, right? Because they're affirming. But no, anything we tell ourselves, I'm a fake, I'm a fraud, I don't belong here, I'm not good enough, those are affirmations. We are affirming that. We have to break that. And so what I do is when I feel like a fake, it's like, oh, how do I change that? Okay, cool, congrats, I'm stepping out of my CZ. You know, I worked at Twitter for quite a while as a coach. And I don't know if any of you might recognize now Twitter has had a change of ownership. So I don't coach at Twitter anymore because they have a different philosophy on coaching in the present moment. But I had worked with incredible people in leadership at Twitter. So I'm used to hashtagging a lot of different things. So I'm like, I'm stepping out of my CZ. I'm, cool and congrats. I'm stepping out of my CZ. I don't belong here. Of course I belong here. And, it's going to feel a little different. It's going to feel new and different. It's going to feel maybe even a little awkward. I'll own that uncomfortableness sometimes. It doesn't always have to be completely uncomfortable. As I go back to the comfort zone piece, it's like, step out of your comfort zone. You got to do this. You're going to be afraid. Yeah, it might feel I might have some trepidation around it. You might have that feeling in your stomach sometimes when your hand goes up and you're going to say something, or you're going to step on stage, or you're going to take that promotion, or you're going to go on that first date. Yeah, but it does feel new and different because that's what I'm doing. I'm growing. They're going to find out I'm a fraud. Well, who is they? That was the question asked by a mentor of me. Who's they? And who cares? Like, really, who cares? I'm a growth in progress. I love the growth in progress. We always like to say a work in progress. Again, it's like, it sounds like a lot of work. I'm a growth in progress. I'm growing. I'm completely I'm like an amoeba. I'm just going to be growing all over the petri dishes. I'm just continually going to be inspired by that. So it's celebrating our imposter and making it work for us through these three things that I just showed you. Awareness of when it happens, become your own advocate. So this is self-awareness, self-advocacy. So become your own advocate. I can own it. And then take the action that's necessary. To go back that quick little example of the guy buying the books from me, which sounds kind of, it's like, hello, but it's like I had awareness. I became my own advocate. And then the action was absolutely buy the books. All that took place in like I said, 5 seconds. It could be any kinds of action though that occurs in our life. When life gives us a lesson in front of us sometimes, what's the awareness around it? How do we become an advocate for ourselves? And then what's the action? As I mentioned to you earlier, let people be who they are and adjust your proximity accordingly. So it doesn't mean you have to get rid of people or have a whole new tribe. But, when you're going for, you're a growth in progress, you're starting out in a new business, a new job, a new role, a new relationship, a new school program, a new academic journey. You want people that are going to be surrounding you to some degree to give you some support and advocacy. But you have to be your own advocate. You can't rely on that external validation. Andy mentioned I coach at the Wharton School. All of their MBA students in the second year get an executive coach. So I'm able to coach at the Wharton School. And it's like, it's incredible when they go on this journey. Any of you that have ever gone for any kind of new academic journey can understand they have a lot of imposter syndrome, though. They have a lot of like, I don't really belong here. What am I doing here? Even though we go through our own goals to get where we are at, but we can still let those feelings and those thoughts come into play. So imposter reframe is, I don't think I'm going to be successful at this. Whoa, wait a minute. I am successful at it. My success is my own. So it's, in other words, when I do a workshop on imposter syndrome, I do these imposter reframes and what I would consider imposter loops, because we can all have our loops, but this is a successful reframe, right? Where I don't think I'm going to be successful here, or I don't belong here, or I'm not good enough, or I'm a fake or fraud. It's like, wait a minute, then what can I say in place of that? And then what happens in place of that? Awareness, advocacy, and action. And it works. So that's who I am, folks. There's a science to imposter syndrome, which is to really understand how it works in our mind and how it is triggered. And then the art is doing something around that. So I wrote a book, as I mentioned, a few years ago called Find Your Voice. Again, because I was like, okay, I've got all these voices up here. What's the one I want to find? Or how do I put all these voices together, right? To create who I am as a leader in life. Doesn't matter the position, doesn't matter the title. And I use a model that is around really understanding who you are in terms of your core values. Because when our values are compromised, we have a certain kind of degree of thoughts and feelings around that. What are the outcomes we look for in our lives, right? How do we generate that influence, not just with ourselves, but with relationships of trust and credibility with others who can help us along? What's the courage we need to take? I talked about courage and I talked about curiosity and those baby steps, in terms of really, really coming into our own in terms of courage. And then more importantly, what's our expression, our brand? So that's who I am. I leave us today. We have maybe a few minutes for any questions. I invite everyone. I do a lot of travel. I'm blessed because travel opens my mind up when I work with organizations and I work with myself. Travel brings power and love back into your life. And there's nothing more, because when I put myself in a community or I help out in different communities, it just opens me up. It expands my mind. It challenges me and it challenges all my tolerances as well. So thank you so much for today. Here's how you can find me online. Shoot me email. I'm still on Twitter, by the way. Certainly LinkedIn. I love all of the connections on LinkedIn, and of course my Facebook business page and so forth. So love to, I'll stop there. I'll stop the share. And Andy, do we have questions or anything else?
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. There's a couple questions that have come in. So the first one, I can't help but think that quote unquote imposter thinking is related to people's personality styles. Have you seen any studies that link between the level of prevalence of imposter syndrome and different personality types, either on DISC or Myers-Briggs?
Yeah, great question. More with Myers than with DISC, although I would think with DISC as well. I'm having used that instrument exclusively in organizations. But with Myers-Briggs, as I mentioned, I'm an introvert. Well, introverts spend a lot of time up here, right? We process a lot up here before we say anything. So there's a direct correlation sometimes with introverts staying introverted and staying up here, versus the extroverts who may, and this is, I don't want to make this a statistical reference across the board, who may challenge certain things, who may actually want, because of their extroversion and where they get their energy from others, they may try something else. They may actually say something else. They may raise their hand. They may challenge something. So as an introvert myself, and working with other introverts, especially in the tech world, the algorithms up here are so strong that yes, we can tend to create the voices in much more mature ways than the extroverts, who may just kind of come right out and test it out with a group, and that will help them kind of create more of a flow out of the imposter voice, if that makes sense.
Thanks so much for that, Paul. There's some good praise that has been coming in from folks. This was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul, for sharing all these new perspectives and analogies. I'm grateful I signed up for this workshop. Yeah, so some really good, really great praise that has come in from here. We have time for one last question, and it's one that I wanted to ask you, Paul. So here at American Family Insurance, at DreamBank, we are a community that is built up of fellow fearless dreamers. And I'm wondering, we always like to pull our speakers. What's one piece of advice you have for someone who's actively pursuing a dream right now?
Go, take that step. Just find that step that you can take. Dreaming. So when you think of dreaming and we think of vision, it can be overwhelming. It can be intimidating, but find that little paintbrush and just start painting. It's like this painting behind me in my house, as I mentioned. This can be overwhelming to look at, to think, how does somebody do that? And somebody might think, well, of course it's easy to just kind of throw colors up there. You take that one little paintbrush and you just start painting. And it goes back to what I said earlier, one step, one baby step, no matter how small. That's what I work on with myself And that's what as a coach, that's what I work on, is just doesn't matter how small, there's no step that's too small.
Yeah, that's great. And I appreciate that. And I was thinking back to the slide that you had shared as well, that featured that, one step as well too. So
yeah,
appreciate you sharing. That's all the time we have for, unfortunately, today. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their day to join us here. Thank you, Paul, for such a wonderful presentation. Again, the praise is still coming in. But with that being said, we will go ahead and cap it there, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you, everybody. It was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Andy.
Bye-bye.